Hello, my name is Pearl Fernandez, and today we're going to be talking about the special needs education in Ireland. We're going to start off with talking a little bit about the legislation on special needs education. We're then going to talk about the National Council for Special Education, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what special needs education looks like at the primary level, post-primary level, and higher education level. So as per the Education for Persons with Special Educational Needs Act, a person who's considered to have special needs is when a person's capacity to participate and benefit from education is impacted due to a disability, whether it be a physical, sensory, or mental health or a learning disability, or any condition really that results in a person's learning differently from a person without that condition. The Act states that a child with special educational needs has the right to be educated in an inclusive environment along with other children who do not have that disability. Their goal really is to achieve as much integration as possible, unless, of course, it is not appropriate for that student. When it's not appropriate, then a range of special support services are provided, and some of the support services may include special schools, that are dedicated to particular disability groups, or providing resource teachers and assigning special need assistants, also known as SNAs, throughout this presentation. The Act also states that people with disabilities have the same right to benefit from education as other students who don't have disabilities. Their goal really is to support children with disabilities to leave schools with the skills required to live a more independent and fulfilled life. They provide consultation with children and their parents to discuss what their needs are, and they also establish the National Council for Special Education, who's responsible to deal with matters around education for people with disabilities. The National Council for Special Education was set up to improve the delivery of education to people who require special needs within the school that they're attending. The emphasis is specifically on children, and they actually publish guidelines for schools to follow when they're applying for any additional resources that students may require. They also administer and process applications for special educational resources using its network called the Special Educational Needs Organizers, and we're also going to refer to them as CNOs. So according to the National Council for Special Education, CNOs are appointed to provide a direct local service to the parents and to the schools, depending on the geographical area. So if I have a child who has special needs, we would be assigned within our geographical area to a CNO who can then help the family and help the school identify some of the needs of the children before determining the level of resource that the school is going to require to support that student. They also deal with applications from all schools if they require any additional teaching and SNAs. And they also assist with applications for any type of assistive technology that may be required, and also if any special transportation is required. And finally, what they provide as well is they advise schools and parents on what some of the facilities, what some of the resources are, and what some services those children can access. So the SNAs provide the non-teaching care support. So they are allocated to schools to support students who have care needs as a result of a disability, behavior difficulty, or a significant medical issue. So what an SNA usually will provide is if the student is requiring any extra help with feeding, with changing, going to the washroom. So when I think of SNAs in comparative to what we have here in Canada, I think of child and youth care practitioners, or I think of personal support workers, where their role really is to support the client or support the student on a non-academic level. So the teacher and the resource teacher focuses on the academic piece, and then the SNA focus on more of the care needs for the child. And they can work with multiple students, or they can work with individual students, and they can work either a few hours a week or full time depending on the needs of that child. So when we look at special education in primary, we also refer to that as the first level, and they generally start at the age of 6, from class 1 to 6. However, generally a lot of kids will start a school in Ireland at the age of 4, and then they start their formal education at the age of 6. So children in the primary level, if they have special educational needs, they can be either taught in a regular classroom or in a special classroom within a mainstream school. Any extra educational support is provided by the learning support resource teacher, and then the care support is provided by the SNA. So the learning support teacher is available pretty much to all primary schools, and they have a learning support guidelines to follow, which is published by the Department of Education and Skills. So the learning support guidelines pretty much outlines the procedures and the process in which how to identify children who may be struggling with math and reading and who may have learning difficulties or special education needs and require extra teaching resources. So this is where the learning support teacher is able to kind of go through what are some of the guidelines before determining what a student's need, what a student may need. Now, if a child continues to struggle, even after the teacher and the resource teacher has supported them, then the school can send a referral to have the child psychologically assessed by the National Educational Psychological Service. So when I think of the system here in Canada, if we do see a student struggling, the school can then request that the child go through a psychoeducational assessment, and then an individualized education plan is created that is made specifically for that student. So once that is done, then the school will be able to kind of implement specific resources to support that student. Primary schools generally get an allocation to appoint a learning support teacher to meet the needs of that child, such as if they're struggling with any learning disabilities, so like dyslexia, borderline, and mild learning difficulties, and to support the students with more severe special needs, like if there's hearing or visual impairments, or children on the autistic spectrum disorder, or any type of developmental disorder. The school then has to apply to the National Council for Special Education in order to access more resource teaching hours. Now, when we move on to the post-primary, we're talking about kids between the ages of 12 and 18, and the post-primary school starts from grade 7. So children with special educational needs in post-primary school, just like in post-primary, just like in primary, they can be taught in a regular or a special classroom in mainstream schooling. However, what's different here is they can also be taught in special schools. So unlike primary, in post-primary, you do have options to attend a special school, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides. Like in primary schools, students may get extra educational support from resource teachers and SNAs if required. The school can apply for a grant to make the school more accessible for students with a disability. For example, if they need to put in a ramp or an accessible toilet accommodation. The information can be found in the building unit of the Department of Education and Skills. The resource teachers are allocated by the National Council for Special Education, who have also issued an information and guidelines that the school can follow when putting in applications for any type of extra educational supports that are required in the school. Now, something that's good to know is that if a student had additional teaching support in primary school, a formal assessment or diagnosis is required by the post-primary school when applying for any type of additional resources for that student. SNA support, unlike in primary school, SNA support is only provided for students with chronic and serious care needs. Usually, instead of having an SNA, the post-primary school usually tend to use a combination of differentiated additional supports from class teachers and learning support teachers, as opposed to a care from an SNA. Usually, the SNA is not generally desirable for post-primary students unless absolutely necessary because they believe it can impede the students' independence and socialization needs at an important developmental stage of their life. So the SNA is only provided if it's an absolute need. Their accommodations are also made for students whose level of disability would make it difficult for them to benefit from the junior and leaving certificate programs. And also, students with specific disabilities may be exempt from certain parts of an examination. For example, if a student has a hearing impairment, they may be exempt from the oral component of the examination. So this is something that's different from primary, is that post-primary schools actually have specialized schools. So the specialized schools are based on the type of disability. So they have special schools for students with learning disabilities. They have special schools for students who have visually impaired or hearing impaired. And then they also have students for special schools for students with disabilities. And finally, there's a small number of schools that are available for students who have behavioral and emotional difficulties. So when I think of comparing in Canada in the post-primary level, we actually have classes here that schools here called alternative schooling, where the classes are much smaller. There's more one-to-one support, and only students who are struggling with a certain type of disability will be attending that school. So that's what I think of in terms of when they say special post-primary, but this specialized schooling is not available at the primary level. So the way supports can be accessed is parents will usually talk to the school principal about what type of education their child will need. And then they can also consult with their local CNO about what learning supports or additional resources are available for their child with special needs. Finally, the National Council for Special Education has published a booklet that parents can access to get more information on what types of services are available for their children. So finally, now we're going to go into what special need education may look like in a higher education or a third level. So in Ireland, higher education usually refers to universities and teacher training colleges. So the interesting thing to know here is SNA support is not provided for adults attending education centers, and higher education have their own arrangements to support students with special needs. Generally, the way that starts is they do a student can attend the accessibility services within the institution, and they usually conduct a needs assessment to determine the type and the level of accommodation that's required. For example, if you need educational support workers, do you need note takers? If you need an interpreter, if any assistive technology is required, all of those things are assessed and determined with the academic and administrative staff, along with if they have any referral from their doctors, they can also do that. So what's good to know is that each institution can have their own arrangements, and it can look very different going from one institution to the other. So the National Council for Students for Special Education has developed a booklet providing general information on post-school education, on training options, and supports for adults with disabilities. So the higher education programs, policies, and supports are also outlined in this booklet, along with the types of funding that's available for students with disabilities. And again, like I said, it's important to know that disability support services can look very different from institution to institution. So it'll be interesting when we are in country for me, or even for us to find out what is that going to look like when we go to each university. So for example, when we go to Queen's University, it'd be interesting to know what is the process involved when a student has special needs. How is it that they would access those services? the goal really here at the end of the day is that the government wants more people, including those with disabilities, to be able to access higher education. Thank you very much for your time. I have included a list of references. If you wanted any more detailed information, you can definitely take a look at the list, or you could also email me if you have any further questions. Thank you.